is our usual Sunday crowd here at St. Paul's. I am George Woodford, Rector of St. Paul's, and we have enjoyed many years of happy events and relationships with JC3 and JC3 and with Chesma. I think the last time Martin Fletcher was here, it was for a talk on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, would you think the Dead Sea Scrolls would be controversial? And yet there was some controversy. So these are unfortunately more agitated times. I would ask you to use your synagogue voice or your church voice, but those can get loud too. So use your inside voice when we ask questions. There are bathrooms this way, if you can make your way to them. And there is a reception courtesy of Chesma following our talk today. My assistant, Padre Miguel Angel, is around for questions. And I just want to say thank you to Lynn Duroff. Lynn Duroff teaches free English classes to young nationals every Tuesday and Thursday here at St. Paul's. And Lynn, I'm not sure where you are in the wandering Jewish category, but we thank you for your labor among us. And now so turn off your cell phones. Now my friend Kayla Fine will take the mic, and she doesn't like to let it go.
Okay, so thank you, Father George, for that very complimentary introduction and for hosting our event. And when I say our, I mean the JC3 Chessman event. We are the Jewish Community Center of San Miguel. And anyone who has questions about that center can see me afterwards. But also thank you, where did you go, for being an excellent friend of the Jewish community here in San Miguel.
Privilege.
And speaking of privileges, it's my privilege and my honor to invite Martin Fletcher. He actually invited himself, which is so thrilling. Actually Hagar, his wife, got in contact with my husband Elliot and me and said, Martin needs to speak to people about what's going on in the Middle East. Can you organize something from the JC3? And we said, absolutely. So thanks to Father George, also for having hosted the anti-Semitism panel last year, that Martin Fletcher was on as well. And we look forward to a flourishing and continuing relationship with St. Paul's and with all of the churches here in town over time. So, without further ado, Martin Fletcher is known to many as the long-time NBC News Mideast Bureau Chief and correspondent based in Israel. He has won almost every award in TV journalism, including 5 Emmys, 3 for his work in Israel and Gaza, and others for his work in Rwanda and Kosovo. He won the DuPont, which is the TV Pulitzer, for his work in the West Bank and Gaza, several Overseas Press Club awards, and the Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence several times. Anderson Cooper called Martin Fletcher for decades the gold standard of TV war correspondence. Martin walked across the Hindu Kush mountains from Pakistan into Afghanistan with the Mujahideen. He was the only television reporter to join the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the only reporter to enter the American embassy in Tehran when Iranians held American diplomats hostages for 444 days. He has worked as a special correspondent at NBC News and PBS NewsHour, and now devotes himself to writing books. His second book, Walking Israel, won America's National Jewish Book Award for nonfiction. His 6th book, a novel, Promised Land, was a finalist. He's the only writer to be recognized in both fiction and nonfiction. So please join me now in welcoming our proud, full-time resident of San Miguel de Allende, Martin Fletcher.
Well, thank you for that applause. I think I can go now. My job is done. They told me it was going to be an older crowd, but this is ridiculous. In honor of you all, I'm wearing my hearing aids for the first time, so if they slip out. Look, what I wanted to do was basically, at this incredibly difficult, sensitive time in the Middle East, and basically in all over the world, because it's such a topic that so many people are interested in and personally concerned with. I wanted to talk about, I guess, at what point do people come together? What is the history of the conflict? What is the blindness of the two peoples with each other, vis-a-vis each other? And I wanted to take this opportunity to speak to my friends in San Miguel de Allende and everybody visiting. And I'm hoping that we will have a discussion. It won't just be me talking. I'm planning to talk for about 15 minutes or so. That's all. Normally I talk for about an hour, but like 15 minutes or so. And then I want to open it up to questions. And I think you're going to be filling out cards, maybe, and giving them to Kayla. And I'll answer questions. But I'm also hoping that there'll be discussion amongst you. If I say something that somebody objects to, jump in there. Feel free. Quietly, respectfully, keep the knives in your pocket. But I do hope to have a discussion as well as just a talk. So I hope that's what this is going to be about. Now, actually, normally I just wing it, but I've written a lot down here, so I'll be reading quite a bit too. So here's the thing: nobody who believes, I'm not here to try and persuade anybody. It's just that with my vast experience, really, in the region, and also covering conflicts in other parts of the world, I come from a certain point of view and a certain perspective that can be useful. Such as this perspective. So, look, nobody who believes that Israel is responding disproportionately and creating a humanitarian disaster in Gaza, killing 5,000 children, is going to be persuaded otherwise. They're always going to think that. And nobody who believes that on that day of October 7, when Hamas terrorists went into the Israeli homes and massacred, raped, mutilated, and took hostage 1,200 Israelis plus another 250 hostages, they're never going to be persuaded otherwise either. So this is not about persuading anybody. Nobody is going to be persuaded to change their minds. They're like this. The question is, when does that become this? At what point? How do you achieve that? So I think that's what I'm interested in. And that's what I've always done when I've been traveling around the world doing my stories. I've always looked for stories to tell that united people, that explained what's happening here to a person over there who may not know too much about the subject, talking to you. But it's important to know the background. I'm not going to get into the history of it. I'm just going to talk about what I think is specifically relevant to today and indicates maybe a way forward. That's what I want to try and do. So there's two essential questions, I think, and people may disagree, but to me this is what I think the essence of this conflict is about today. Not the overall conflict going on for hundreds of years and even more, but today. So the Israeli. 1,200 people raped, mutilated, murdered, kidnapped. 250 taken hostage, sitting with their hands tied behind their backs in some dark tunnel somewhere in Gaza. So the Israeli question is, given who did that to us, the loudest support for the people who did it, why is the greatest support in the world for the people who committed these crimes? Why? That's the Israeli question. For the Palestinians, it's a different question. They took our land. We've suffered and been oppressed for 75 years. When is enough enough? Why don't people understand that we will do anything to get our freedom? To me, I think there's those two questions are like this, and they sum up exactly why there can be no agreement between the two. They kidnapped, murdered, and kidnapped, and in the most horrific ways, raped, disgusting stuff. And yet people seem to sympathize more with the victims, say the Israelis. The Palestinians say, well, of course, this is what we need to do to fight, to achieve our freedom. So that's the essence, I think, of where we are today. Each side totally committed to the righteousness of its own cause. And yet people are much angrier today also than in conflicts between Israel and Hamas in the last few years. People are very angry about what's happening today. You see this anger in the streets, in the campuses around the world, much more than in the many conflicts between Israel and Hamas. Israel and Hamas have been fighting just in the very recent history, since Israel left Gaza, took out its settlers in 2005. Israel and Hamas have been fighting in 2000, if I get this right, 2008, 2011, 2014, 2018, 2021, now 2023. Did I miss one? I think that's it. That's pretty much it. It's extraordinary. So it's been the same cycle all the time. There's some provocation by one side or the other. Then Israel attacks. The Palestinians fire more rockets at Israel. More dead. It goes on for sometimes. In 2014, it went on for 60 days. How many days is it now? I think we're almost at 60 days already, and with nowhere near and no end in sight. Sometimes it just takes 4 or 5 days. But the bottom line is always the same. It ends in a ceasefire, and then it continues. The fighting resumes just a few years later. Now, my job has always been to sit on the fence. I'm a reporter. That's my job. My job has always been to try and to be fair to both sides, and that's what I've always done. Now, before we get into what I'm really going to be talking about, I just want to say that my personal reporting from Gaza, I've been there probably about 100 times in Gaza, and the West Bank a lot more. And I've seen that story from the beginning. So Israel occupied Gaza in '67. Thankfully, I'm not that old, but my first trip there was in 1973 in that region. I was actually a news agency cameraman then. And if you remember when Arik Sharon crossed the canal into Egypt in the Yom Kippur War, I was the only foreign cameraman to go with him. I was the World Pool agency cameraman. So that was in 1973, an extraordinary experience. Then I began covering, I was living in Israel at the time as a cameraman. Then it was like 6 years after Israel took Gaza in 1967. At that point, people from Tel Aviv, including me, we were driving down from Tel Aviv to Gaza to go and eat shrimp in the beach restaurants with our Palestinian friends. People in Gaza were working in Israel. The Israeli textile industry at that time, in the 70s until around about the mid-80s, was basically based on Palestinians working in Gaza, sewing, knitting, making the clothes, and selling them in Israel. People came from Gaza to Israel to visit. I once went with a family from Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza to the house inside Israel that was taken from their parents in 1948. When Israel won that war in 1948, refugees were created. About 200,000 of them went to live in Gaza. The borders were open, and the refugees in Gaza were able to go to visit their homes inside Israel if they wanted to. And I went with one family doing that, and they didn't warn the Israeli family who was living in their house that they were coming. They knocked on the door, and I saw all this. The Israelis opened the door and said, it's like 12 people, old people, and the whole family had come from Jabalia refugee camp to see their house. And they said, this used to be our house. And the Israeli family said, oh my God, that's fantastic. Come in. And they showed them around, and they had tea and coffee in the yard outside. And it was like a picnic. The Palestinians brought their picnic to have in their old house inside what is now Israel. So who would imagine today that those kind of relations were possible? But that was the reality. At that time, Gush Katif, there was about 8,000 Jews living inside Gaza, Jewish settlers living inside Gaza. They built hotels. People from all over Israel and some Jews from around the world came to go on holiday in the Israeli community in Gaza. It's insane looking back, but there was a possibility of coexistence at the time. And at that time, until the mid-80s, half of the people who had jobs in Gaza, who were working, were working inside Israel. I'm just saying all of this to make the point that actually they did live together. Today it seems impossible, but they did live together, and it could happen again. Unfortunately, the Israeli attitude at the time was, oh, well, you see, it's all peaceful and we can live together, how wonderful. Not understanding that the Palestinian reaction was, they're the occupiers. We don't have a choice. It's not what we want, it's not what we like, it's what we've got. And so it was a very different kind of relationship, but it was a relationship. Then what happened was the first Intifada broke out in 1987. There were bomb attacks from Gaza. In the early 1990s, Israel built the fence around Gaza. It wasn't to create a prison inside Gaza, it was to stop terrorists coming from Gaza and killing Israelis. That's why there's a fence there. Then there was the Intifada 2, the settlers were evicted in 2005, elections were held among the Palestinians in 2006, there was a war in 2007 between the Palestinians of Hamas in Gaza and Fatah, the PLO organization based in the West Bank. Hamas won and kicked out Fatah, etc., etc., etc. I was there, and all of these things I'm talking about, I was there. And I'm only saying that simply to say, okay, so if I'm talking about Gaza, I know what I'm talking about. Doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with what I'm saying, but I saw all this. I was there reporting. I want to go on with a warning now. So now I'm getting into, that was kind of the setup. I'm now getting into, this is the story of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship and how inevitable it is that today they're still fighting. So I want to begin with a warning. And this warning may appear old news. It is that the Palestinians in Gaza hate the Israelis just a mile away across the border. And they're just waiting for the Jews to drop their guard. Then they will tear them to pieces. The man who gave this warning, not me, said it more eloquently, beyond the furrow that marks the border lies a surging sea of hatred and vengeance. Anybody know who said that? When? It's old news because it is, exactly, Moshe Dayan, 1956. It's from a famous eulogy. Moshe Dayan, the Israeli Army Chief of Staff, 67 years ago, he said that. It was a funeral of a guy called Roy Rutenberg. He was the security chief of the army base at Nahal Oz, on the border with Gaza. He was killed by Palestinians who came across the border. They were attacking, and he was on his horse, and he was killed. Diane said at the funeral, well, of course they hate us. They will try to destroy this place. He got right to the heart of the matter. He could have written it yesterday, or rather October 6th. This is what he wrote at Roy Rutenberg's eulogy, funeral. Why should we complain of their hatred for us? Years have they sat in the refugee camps of Gaza and seen with their own eyes how we have made a homeland of the soil and the villages where they and their forebears once dwelt. In other words, we're living on their houses. Dayan, Israel's most famous soldier, he was chief of staff, defense minister, hero of the 1967 war. He saw the future. He understood the Palestinians. And his response, though, was a soldier's response. It was a warning, and I'm quoting again. We must be morning and evening armed and ready. We mustn't avert our eyes lest our hands be weakened. That is the decree of our generation. That is the choice of our lives, to be willing and armed, strong and unyielding, lest the sword be knocked from our fists and our lives severed. So it's pretty incredible. I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about today, but this was in 1956. Like nothing's changed. Actually, a lot changed and nothing changed. That is the decree of our generation, he said. Be ready, be strong, fight. He was hoping for peace for his children, but he knew his generation had to fight, stay strong. A generation later, Israel's finance minister, Yaakov Neiman, said to me, when I was speaking to him, he said, the role of our generation is to stay strong so that the next generation can make peace. That was in about the mid-1980s. Well, the next generation's come and gone, and now another generation faces the same old quandary. What's next? Where's peace? For how long can we be strong? So this has been going on for several generations. The issue was framed by Moshe Dayan in 1956, and it's still the same issue today. Exactly the same issue today. Now, as I say, I've been in Gaza, many, many times. I mean, I'm guessing at 100, probably more. I mean, anyway, a lot of times. So I know the place quite well. I've been to all the camps, I've spoken to Hamas, I've been with all the different fighting groups and whatnot. When I was there once, I met a boy named Yusuf. So this kid, Yusuf, 12 years old, he's in bed, paralyzed from the waist down. He was throwing stones at Israeli soldiers, as they did in those days. That was like almost, in England where I grew up, you sort of kick the football against the wall on the way home from school. In Gaza, on the way home from school, you stop and you throw stones at the Israeli soldiers. That's like part of the course. And he was 12 years old, and he got shot in the neck, and he was paralyzed. So when I saw him in his little dark room in one of the refugee camps, actually, no, it wasn't refugee, it was in Khan Yunis, which is the centre of the fighting today, Khan Yunis. So this kid, Yusuf, was in Khan Yunis, where he lived. And when I met him, he was lying in bed, it was a dark room. He got no help from the Palestinian Authority in terms of rehabilitation for his injuries. His father was with him. He's lying in bed. His father had hooked up a pulley, and on one end of the rope was a tin can full of stones and rocks, and Yusuf was pulling on this tin can from a rope over the pulley to strengthen his arm muscles. That was his rehabilitation. In fact, the PA actually gave him a check, his father a check, once a month, 150 shekels check, about $35. When I spoke to him, the father said, they've been giving me this check for 12 months, 9 times the check bounced. So that was the kind of help that he was getting. In other words, nothing. So I said to this kid, Yusuf, I said, was it worth it? And he answered with a tiny, thin little voice of his. He said, we must all make sacrifices for Palestine. That's what he said. As a matter of fact, when I told my wife Hagar about Yusuf on that day, the next day when I went back, or a couple of days later, Hagar gave me all kinds of stuff to take to this kid to help him, the medicine. And I think you gave me this thing that when somebody's bedridden, you lie on some kind of like a rubber tire type of thing to help him, right? So I brought all this stuff down to help this kid Yusuf. And another time, by the way, there was a lot of fighting going on. I called my Palestinian producer in Gaza, Waji. He had 2 wives and 5 children, and the whole place was closed off. There was a siege for about 3 weeks when I was able to get down there finally. I said to him, Waji, what shall I bring you? I was thinking maybe toys for the kids or medicines. Marty says, I know, thank God you're coming. Bring me whiskey and cigarettes. That was Waji's need in those desperate times for his family. Anyway, when Yusuf said we must all make sacrifices for Palestine, I didn't believe him for a minute. Presumably somebody said, this is what you're going to say to this American TV crew. He must have been told what to say, but that is what's driving the war today. Israel's need to be strong, building a homeland on the land the Palestinians say is theirs, and the Palestinians' willingness to make sacrifices for generations. That's what it's all about. And to wait and to seek Israel's weak spot, as Diane said. Now that same kibbutz of Nachal Oz, where Diane spoke 56 years ago, 67 years ago, that's the same place that was one of the first to be overrun now on October the 7th, Nachal Oz. They killed 73 Israelis in that one place. And others were kidnapped. Now, at first, it was a brilliant military operation. You've got to say. I mean, what Hamas did. This is not welcome to the ears of many. But what Hamas did was a brilliant military operation. Sadly, it turned out into a horrific series of terrorist atrocities. That was Hamas's plan. It wasn't that these guys went off the rails. We know it was the plan. We've seen the attack orders. The idea was to win militarily, and then terrorize through murder, mutilation, rape, and kidnapping. That was the plan. It worked too. Now, Moshe Dayan, going back to him, warned that the struggle would be long and merciless, and his prescience is remarkable. He said in that eulogy for Roy, quote, "The millions of Jews annihilated without a land peer out at us from the ashes of history and command us to settle and rebuild a land for our people. But beyond the furrow that marks the border lies a surging sea of hatred and vengeance. yearning for the day that tranquility blunts our alertness, for the day that we heed the ambassadors of hypocrisy who call for us to lay down our arms. Now, Diane was quite a poet, but he was also a great soldier. So let's just think about that, what he just said. Let's unpack that last bit. Palestinians, quote, yearning for the day that our tranquility blunts our alertness. Now, that's exactly what happened October 7th. Israel was not alert. It appeared so quiet, so calm, in fact, that 3 days before October 7th, the Israeli army moved 3 brigades who were guarding the border with Gaza to the West Bank, because it was the Jewish holiday coming up and they wanted to guard the Jewish settlers who were going to go there to pray in the holy sites. So that's how unready they were. They actually took soldiers away from Gaza at that time, leaving it almost unguarded. And Diane then said, they're waiting, quote, for the day that we heed the ambassadors of hypocrisy, who call for us to lay down our arms. Again, that's exactly what's happening today. Government pressure from the different governments around the world, the United Nations, Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, they're all calling on Israel to lay down their arms for a ceasefire. Demonstrating across the globe, US cameras, they want Israel to call a ceasefire. And yet everyone knows, and they should know because Hamas keeps saying it, that the minute Israel lays down their arms, if there is a longer ceasefire, Hamas will rebuild and attack again. That's what happened. 2008, 11, 14, it just goes on. It's the same story. Ceasefire, rebuild, attack. But this last attack was so horrific and so much beyond every other attack that Israel's response has also been beyond every other response. And now we're in this huge mess where there's humanitarian disaster out of all proportion in Gaza. But on the other hand, what are you going to do? So we'll talk about that. Prescient and precise as Diane was, one thing he didn't do is he didn't offer a solution, apart from standing strong. But you can only stand strong for so long. And when is might not enough might? Where would Israel be today without America? Where would Israel be today without you guys, whoever's from America? In deep shit, frankly. Without American resupplies of weaponry, without American diplomatic, political support, we have to think long and hard about how Israel would survive in a situation like this. For that matter, where would Hamas be without Iran? Hezbollah in Lebanon is a wholly owned Iran subsidiary, getting money, weapons, training, planning, orders from Iran. Hamas, the same, but much, much less. Much, much less. It's influenced by Iran. It gets help from Iran. It's not the same as Hezbollah, but it's the same world. The legitimate demands of the Palestinians have been weaponized by Iran. And Hamas are their willing executors. So that leads us to another question, really, I guess, which is, so do the Palestinians support Hamas? There's a lot of talk about Hamas did this, Hamas did that. Yeah, but they're not, the Palestinians is different. They're not. Is it different? I mean, when Hitler won power in Germany, today we always talk about the Nazis did this, the Nazis did that. Actually, the Germans did this and the Germans did that. But we don't talk about that because we sort of kind of remove that onus of responsibility onto this no longer existing evil force called the Nazis. But who were the Nazis? They were the Germans and their supporters in Austria and everywhere else. Same with Hamas. Who is Hamas? They won power. They were elected to power by the Palestinian people. They are the government of Gaza. So when we say Hamas did this and Hamas did that, you're talking about the government in Gaza. It's the government soldiers did this. So the question is, do the Palestinians support Hamas? Now, they did in 2006 when they elected Hamas to power. Nobody was more surprised in 2006 when Hamas won the elections than Hamas itself. I remember I was there. I mean, they were like astonished they won the election. And they won it big time too. It was something like 75 seats to 46 seats. It was a big Palestinian, big Hamas victory. And I remember speaking to them and they would say, who's going to be the Minister of Finance? Where are we going to get a Chief of Staff for the Agriculture Minister? They had nothing prepared. They had no idea they would win, but they did. And then time went by, so all these things happened that I talked about. And then right before October 7, there was an opinion poll held in Gaza by the most prestigious Arab opinion polling group in the Middle East. They held the polls in Gaza, and it showed that basically a majority of Gazans on before October 7, just a few days before, did not support Hamas. They blamed Hamas for their miserable lives in Gaza. Yes, but the question then becomes, in the reality of the Arab world, does it matter what the people think? What matters is that Hamas rules Gaza, whether the people support them or not, through a mixture of corruption, intimidation, and the support of the United Nations. And the United Nations thing we can get into later on if somebody asks the question, but I don't want to go into it. But it's basically without the UN, they wouldn't be able to run the place. So my own personal experience of Hamas isn't actually too bad. I've been pushed, threatened, detained, all kinds of stuff. But whenever I went to Gaza, I was with local Palestinians who basically looked after me. They drove, they arranged meetings, and they kept me safe. I wouldn't say they reported back to Hamas, as far as I know, but if Hamas asked questions, they certainly answered. And if Hamas said, don't take them here, don't take them there, they didn't. And usually, very often when we were interviewing people, trying to get the reaction of Palestinians to whatever we were doing, there was always some guy from Hamas behind me, behind the camera, staring in their eyes, and they better say the right thing. For instance, Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital was like the main hospital in Gaza, and it was this big thing about when Israel said they had their headquarters underneath the hospital, and is it true or not, and there was no proof. Bottom line, everybody who's ever reported in Gaza knows that Hamas has a military headquarters underneath Shifa Hospital. We all know that. I used to go there to interview Hamas spokespeople in the grounds of the hospital. As a matter of fact, what hasn't really been reported, I haven't seen it reported, but the question was always, are there really concrete bunkers underneath Shifa Hospital? And the fact is, in the 1980s, when Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, still here, Israel built those bunkers. Israel built the concrete bunkers underneath Shifa Hospital for its own reasons. They were then extended, and no doubt Hamas built tunnels and did all kinds of stuff. But Israel knows what's underneath there because they built it. And today, when cameramen film the wounded arriving at the hospital, all these horrific pictures of the babies being carried, people running, bleeding babies running from the ambulances into the hospital. Horrific stuff, awful, shouldn't happen, terrible. But you never see pictures of Palestinian fighters being carried into the hospital. You only see pictures of children. And that's because Hamas spokesmen are there telling the people what they can and what they can't film. This happens all the time. I mean, I've seen it myself dozens of times. So Hamas controls the message from Gaza. But again, what about the Palestinians? Are they how are the Palestinian people part of this? So although I'm saying before, they elected them, and Hamas are Palestinians, therefore they have a responsibility. Nevertheless, most Palestinians don't want what Hamas wants. Hamas has hijacked legitimate Palestinian concerns and needs in order to create what it wants, which is very clear, an Islamic state. That's what Hamas wants. They want an Islamic state. So when demonstrators chant this famous thing, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. This is what we're hearing all the time at the college campuses around the world, in London, in Berlin, everywhere. That's what they're chanting. I got to laugh. Free? Palestine should be free under Hamas, under Sharia law? I don't think so. Women in veils, gays killed, that's the freedom they're demonstrating for. Do they know that? I think probably most people people aren't dumb. They know probably what Hamas stands for. But I guess they're making this calculation. What's more important to me? To support Hamas or to support the Jews? And it is the Jews. Don't think for a minute that it's Israel. I'll explain why I say that in a minute. So people make the calculation. They decide, we're going to support Hamas rather than support the Jews. Why? Don't ask me. But let's look at that slogan. From the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. It's the rallying cry everywhere. Now there's a lot of debate about what it means. From the river to the sea. You hear it everywhere. By the way, even in Congress, right, among liberal progressives, they say what they mean is that Palestinians should live in a democratic country where they are free citizens, everywhere. In Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. Well, you know what? It sounds good to me. I mean, why not? They should be free. Everybody should be free. So, fair enough. I can agree with that. Actually, that's what a two-state solution is all about. Everybody with the same rights between the river and the sea should be free. Of course they should. I mean, why would you not agree with that? But if that's what they want, that everybody should be free, why don't they say so? Why don't they say, from the river to the sea, everybody must be free? I mean, it still rhymes. It's just as good as a slogan. But they don't say that, do they? They don't say that. And by the way, you never hear the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free? One place you never hear it is in Palestine. I've never heard Palestinians use that slogan in all my time in the West Bank and Gaza. They don't really have demonstrations, by the way, in the sense that we do. They don't sort of take to the streets with banners and shouting, all that kind of stuff. What they do is they demonstrate after Friday prayers, and before and after funerals, they're in the streets with their slogans, whatnot. But they're not shouting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They're shouting something else, quite different. They're shouting, Et Bach al-Yahud. Et Bach al-Yahud is what they slogan. It means slaughter the Jews. It's the only slogan you really hear with regularity. It's not slaughter the Israelis. They don't talk about Et Bach al-Israeli. How would you say that? I don't know. Slaughter the Israelis. It's el-Yahud, the Jews. Slaughter the Jews. That's the slogan. So, and I said, just to repeat that, because I've been personally in hundreds of demonstrations, tear gas, rubber bullets, live bullets, the real thing, burning tires, running back and forwards. Even the suicide bombers. I've known several suicide bombers. I've known the people who make the bombs, and I've known the people who train the suicide bombers. I've had late night discussions with these people. It's been part of my job. I got to know them very well. More in the West Bank than in Gaza, in Nablus mostly. But they never talk about the Israelis. They talk about Yehud. They talk about the Jews. When the army is coming, they may say, Jesh, the army is coming, the army. But otherwise, as Yehud, you never hear the Israel thing. So that's why today, if you're a Jew and you hear these slogans, who would you believe? The students? Would you believe the students, the campus demonstrators who say, we want a democratic state of their own, Palestinians want to live in freedom? Who would you believe? The students who shout those slogans? Or Hamas? Hamas makes it very clear what they want. I mean, that's what they did on October 7th. And they said, we're going to do it again. Their spokesman keeps saying, we'll do it again and again and again. So if you're a Jew today, personally, I believe Hamas, not the students. Now, when I say that, I believe there are many non-Jews in the audience. I'm really glad. However much you may or may not sympathize with the Jews, with the plight of the Israelis, the Jews, it's really hard, I think, to understand the fear of annihilation in the DNA of many Jews. I say many, because not all, but many Jews have this sense inside them, it can happen again. There's strong genetic evidence that trauma is passed down through generations. This is a scientific area of scientific study today. It is traumatic. Just remember, when the Nazis managed to kill 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, that was 1 out of every 2 Jews on the planet. That's a lot of Jews. Only today, we've just passed the number of Jews in the world that there were in 1939. It's taken that long to kind of read whatever the word is. And all that happened, by the way, before there was Israel to blame. It wasn't because of Israel. It was nothing to do with Israel. It didn't exist. So today, when I say it's hard to understand where Jews are on this subject, what we feel, and I am Jewish, what we feel, is that today Jews ask the question, if we missed the signs in 1933 about what was going to happen, if we missed the signs then, and that led to the death of 6 million, 1 out of every 2 Jews on the planet, are we missing any signs today? It's a legitimate question. Are we missing something? It's actually worse today. I would answer that question myself. Because in 1933 in Germany, the anti-Semitic laws that were beginning to be passed when Hitler came to power in 1933, after he was elected by the German people, were limited to Germany. It was only with the Anschluss with Austria in 1938 that they were able to extend those laws to another country and absorbed Austria into what they call the Third Reich. But it was limited there, that's all there was. The anti-Semitism in 1933, 34, 35, when the Jews, including my family, missed every possible sign of what was about to happen. Today, these anti-Semitic rumblings, and more than rumblings, are actually all around the world. You know, it's not only Hamas. I mean, in all the demonstrations that we see in the United States, in Canada, in Britain, in Europe, everywhere, they're from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Well, excuse me, that means there's going to be no Israel, however you look at that. And the slogans are about the Jews as often as they're about Israel. So I think if you're a Jew in London, you want to be paying attention to this, because we didn't pay attention in 1933. So basically my family didn't believe in Hitler at the time, and almost all of my family were murdered. I mean, everybody. All my grandparents were murdered. Their cousins, their brothers and sisters, their cousins, their aunts, they were all murdered. It was an unbelievable number of people were murdered. And now, today, excuse me, my extended family, Hagar's family, my wife, talk about missing the signs. On October 7th, 3 of Hagar's extended family were murdered by Hamas. 8 were taken hostage. Luckily, 7 were released. 1 is still held. A guy, Tal, he's 38 years old. So do I think the Holocaust could happen again? Frankly, no, I don't. As a matter of fact. Why? Because unlike my family in 1933, but like Moshe Dayan, today we recognize the threat and believe the only answer is to stay strong and hope peace will follow, one way or the other. So we are warned, and we've seen the warning signs. We know what can happen, and we know what it means to have a ceasefire. We know a ceasefire means that, yes, lives get saved in Palestine today, but it means that in 2, 3, 4 years, it'll happen again, more Israelis will be killed, and then more Palestinians will be killed. Just kicking the can down the road all the time. So what do you do about that? So again, I'm not going to offer solutions because I don't know, frankly. I got my own idea. And I hope that maybe we'll have, in a moment, discussion will open up and we can talk about that, the different options. But at this rate, peace, how many generations is it going to take? Or will this latest war be a wake-up call? And Palestinians, Israelis somehow will realize that out of this craziness at the moment, it's not working, one way or the other. And somehow come together to find a way to make movements to live together in peace. When I use the word peace, I don't really mean peace. I'm not expecting a peace agreement between Israel and Hamas, but something has to give. It just can't go on every few years the same stuff. Doesn't seem likely right now, obviously, it's the situation we're in, but it is the only sane way forward. And what I think is that in 2, 3, 4 years, there'll be a change in leadership on both sides. There has to be a change of leadership on both sides. Netanyahu's got to go. Hamas has got to go, one way or the other. Hopefully they'll be replaced by younger leaders on both sides, and they will realize the need to do something. And probably with a very, very thick, big, heavy stick from the United States of America, they'll come together and find a way forward. That's my hope. That's really all I wanted to say. I wanted to situate this situation we're in today, and I'll be now. So this is not MSNBC. It's not Fox. We don't need to shout over each other. Somebody speak. Keep it brief. Because a lot of people want to speak. I hope, and we'll get to everybody. So you're the first. You stood up, so it's your floor. The floor is yours.
Give me a sense what proportion of the Palestinian population in Gaza and the West Bank are card-carrying Hamas, and how many of them not? And
how many what, sorry?
How many non-card? What's the size?
So I'm going to hold the mic.
I want to know. I want to get a sense of what proportion of the Palestinian population are card-carrying Hamas who ideologically want to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth? And what kind of a proportion do you think there is of the Palestinian population that, absent Hamas, could work out a way to live together? For me, the only solution I see is a two-state solution, and I see a two-state solution so far away in the future. I mean, I'm never going to be around to see what happens with this, but that's what has to happen, and the politics of Palestine is just terrible. There are no leadership other than Hamas.
Okay, let me answer the question. I'm going to jump in so that we don't have to long statements and, basically, what percentage of people support Hamas and what percentage of people are in favor of compromise with Israel and a two-state solution, essentially, right? Okay, so this is like a graph. It's like the Swiss Alps, it goes up and down. Today, there are opinion polls have been held. Of course, it's not in the best circumstances given what's going on. But something, it's extraordinary. Something like 90%, 85 to 90% of Palestinians polled today in the West Bank and Gaza support the attack on October 7th. 80 to 90% of Palestinians think it was a good thing. This is what the opinion polls are showing. Now that's today. We're at war. There's a war going on. They support their people. Now, why do they think that? We showed it to the Jews. We showed those guys that we can fight back. This is a blip. It's a moment in history when people feel these kinds of things. As I said earlier, right before October 7th, the majority of Palestinians in Gaza did not want Hamas to remain and blame them for their troubles. So it'll go back to that point eventually. But essentially, you can say that something like 30-40% of Palestinians support Hamas under any circumstances, probably. That's a minority, if you like. Probably a similar number would support peace with Israel. And what I've always said is that if there was a real peace agreement on the table, and you were able somehow magically to remove the leaders from both sides, 60-70% of all Palestinians and of all Israelis would agree to any peace deal, whatever it says, just get this thing over with. But we have extremist leaders on both sides, and it doesn't work that way. Kate is in charge of questions. So.
No, actually what I was going to say is we have some people who've written questions. We're going to be getting some more. So maybe we can go a little bit back and forth between the questions people have written beforehand and the questions that people have on the floor. So one of the questions from that was written before by Ari Razi is that on a few occasions the White House and the Vice President separately, in their efforts to decide the political future of Gaza post-war, the idea of revitalizing the Palestinian Authority was mentioned. Revitalization normally is when something vital, alive, strong, and flourishing, due to certain circumstances, has become dormant. Has become dormant and can be revitalized and brought back to health or life. What would your opinion be in this regard?
I'm having trouble with my hearing aids. My new hearing aids.
What would your opinion be in this regard, knowing that the PLO's 75 years of fighting Israel in every which way, and that Mahmoud Abbas possesses ideas and attitudes similar to those Arafat held? Would revitalizing the PLO this time mean a change of their culture of hatred and autocracy to that of democracy, good governance, good education, and the like? And I'm going to just follow up with that. Some people have been talking about, well, they were able to do denazification. Is that going to be possible?
Hang on, that was a long question. Now there's a follow-up.
And a follow-up, yeah.
Follow
up. You want to hear it?
No, follow up in a minute. Let me just get.
Okay, sure.
Because what was the question again?
Revitalizing the PLO.
Yeah, the PLO. Factor. The bottom line of all that is, can the Palestinian government in Ramallah, Fatah, under Mahmoud Abbas, take over in the Gaza Strip and as a real leader of the Palestinians? Bottom line, the way it is today, not a chance in hell. No way. The Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, has to go. The guy's 88 years old. If you think Joe Biden's too old, this guy is too old. So he's got to go. And The only organization probably that is more corrupt and incompetent than the Hamas government in Gaza is the Fatah government in the West Bank. And this is, every Arab in the West Bank almost would say exactly the same thing as what I just said. So no, they got to go. They are, however, according to the American government policy, the only game in town. Who's going to take over in Gaza eventually? This is a question of discussion, no one really knows, but the bottom line in the end is going to be, they're Palestinians. So the Palestinians got to decide. And there's Palestinians in the West Bank and there's Palestinians in Gaza. Netanyahu's policy was always to divide the two, divide the two in order basically never to need to have serious peace talks with anybody. That has to change, so Netanyahu's got to go too. So when you talk about who can become a reasonable leader of the Palestinians in order to take the Palestinians forward, that question can only go hand in hand with who's going to become a reasonable leader in Israel, who can take Israel forward. It goes together. There's no point changing one without the others. And at some point, somebody was mentioning earlier, maybe before, about Tom Friedman's column in the New York Times, with his idea of what the future would be. And his idea was basically all about give power to the Palestinians on the West Bank, they'll go into Gaza, take over. Well, that didn't work out so well in 2006, when Hamas ended up throwing Fatah fighters off the roof of buildings in Gaza. So first you've got to, first you've got to destroy Hamas. There's no way around it. You will not have a strong Fatah government in the West Bank as long as Hamas is there fighting them. And coming out of this story, coming out of this war, Hamas will be the most popular Palestinian leadership organization. Because they're the ones who stood up to Israel. And we've seen this after every time there's a battle. The opinions always sway in favor of the people who are showing it to the Israelis. They're probably going to get a lot of Palestinian prisoners released, using the Jewish Israeli hostages that they have. The most important issue in Palestinian society is to get prisoners released from Israeli jails. It's the number one priority in the Palestinian world. If Hamas does it, they're a shoo-in to win the next Palestinian election. So that's a problem. If there's elections in a free and fair, Hamas will win. And that was a surprise in 2006 when elections were held. They were only held in the West Bank and Gaza among the Palestinians because Bush, the American president, insisted that they have the free say, insisted on democracy. As I said, nobody thought Hamas would win, but they did. Democracy is not always the answer to everything. And Hamas, there have been no elections since then. So can Fatah in the West Bank lead the Palestinians to some kind of different, more peaceful future? Not right now. But it is the only game in town.
And is there anyone from the audience who has a question? Several. Let's take several.
Hi. This whole idea of destroying Hamas, it always plays on my mind. You hear it from everyone. Once it's destroyed, then what happens? What rises up after Hamas? And with all the resentment that everyone that is surviving in Gaza, like the young children, women, men, everyone, will they then regroup and form something else that's similar, worse, same? I can't get in my mind this of destroying them, that something else must come, because it always seems to.
What will take the place? What will take their place? Yeah, so that is the overall question there. What will take the place of Hamas? And I do have a very, very clear answer to that very important question. No one has the faintest idea. And that is one of the many problems. But we always say that no war should begin without a clear stated goal for the end of the war. What defines success for the goal, for the success for the war? Every government going into war needs to give its army very specific, clear orders about this is what you're supposed to achieve. This is why we want you to achieve it, because after all, many lives are going to be lost. We need to have a good reason, and this is where we're going. So in Israel's case, in this particular war, got no idea where we're going. And the Israel government's got no idea where they're going. The clear goals of the Israel government when they began this war, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, was to get the hostages back and to destroy Hamas militarily and politically. Today, he's pulled back dramatically from that high tree he put himself in and says we want to stop Hamas being able to be a military threat against Israel again. It's a much lower, much degraded goal. But there's been no attention from the Israeli side, publicly at least, about what's going to take place in Gaza. And so the question then becomes, well, why is it Israel's responsibility? They were attacked. 1,200 people were murdered. Given Israel's size of 9 million people, if you compare that proportionally to America, which has got, what was it, 350 million or something? Israel's 9 million people got 1,200 people killed. If that was America proportionally, it would be 51,500 Americans killed in a day. Proportionally, in terms of the impact on society. What the hell would America do? You know, so this thing about what is a proportional response. Israel needs to stop. Israel believed it needs to stop Hamas doing this again. Hamas repeatedly says today, we will do it again. So Israel's continuing with the war as long as America and the world allows it to. But they don't have time to really work on what will happen. I mean, there are groups already working in the United States government, in the European Union, in the Arab League, with the Arab states about who's going to go in there next, who's going to run, who's going to provide food, who's going to provide medicine, when will the kids go to school, who's going to rebuild the homes, how much is this going to cost? I mean, these are all huge questions, but it's too early for Israel, I think, to be saddled with that right now, given the fact that they're simply trying to, at the moment, not simply, but their goal is to get back 150 hostages. 150 Israeli hostages, again, proportionally, multiplied by 40, that's like having 40,000 American hostages being held by, say, Iraq, Iran, or wherever. You know, what would America's priority be? To get the hostages back, or to worry about what's going to happen to Iraq afterwards? It's smart to worry about what happens to Iraq afterwards, but who's got the time in it right now? You know, this whole thing being only been going on for about 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks now. So there's no answer to your question. It is the key question, or one of the key questions. But I would say another key question from Israel's point of view is, will they be able to do this again? And that question of will they be able to do it again is not an academic question about what will happen in 3 or 4 years. It's a question of when will the Jews or when will the Israelis who live around Gaza in all those communities that were destroyed and massacred, when can they go home again? When can their security be guaranteed? When can this, and the same is for the Israelis who left the northern borders with Lebanon, when can they go home again? Because of the threat from Hezbollah. You have 200,000 Israelis who are basically staying with friends and on kibbutzim and places inside in Israel. Everyone's kind of opening up their homes. We have a flat in Tel Aviv, there's someone staying there, I don't even know who it is. It's a young woman who was escaped from that festival, the party, and her boyfriend. So, you know, we say, okay, yeah, stay there, but it's empty anyway, you live there. So that's, you know, it's not an academic question. And for the Palestinians, of course, it's even more not an academic question, especially as winter begins, where you've got something like 1.5 million displaced Palestinians now crammed into half of Gaza. It was bad enough before, now they're in half of Gaza, in the south, you know, with limited amount of aid coming in to help them. As winter sets in, it's cold, it's rainy, they're in these tents, the kids are going to fall sick, there's going to be all kinds of waterborne diseases like typhoid, what are the other ones? I forget now. Yeah, cholera. You know, the kids are playing in the mud, and it's like a horrific. See, we're just seeing the beginning of the worst of it. So there has to be a solution, but it's too early at this point, for Israel at least, to think about it.
George, excuse me, Father George, you have the mic?
I do.
Okay, there are people up here, but there are questions back there?
If anybody wants to...
Here,
Okay.
then I'll call you.
Thank you.
If you could bear with me here a minute. I think it's important for a lot of people, there's a lot of talk about this Gaza situation and Hamas. And a lot of people, to kind of put it in perspective, it's important, I think, to understand that how it's, let's say, painting with a wide brush like you did with the Germans and the Nazis, that it goes beyond a Palestinian issue, that it's an Arab issue, or shall you say a Muslim issue. From when you quoted Moshe Dayan, he said that 8 years, give or take, after the creation of Israel. And it's a Muslim versus Jew or an Arab versus Jew thing in a sense, because the day after Israel was created, more or less, when they're attacked by every Arab nation surrounding them, this is an ongoing plight. And I don't understand, well, the focus is on Gaza, and I think it's a bigger problem, and that people need to see that there can never be a two-state solution, because then you have to acknowledge the Jews. And for a lot of the Arabs, they don't want the existence of the Jews, therefore they don't want the existence of Israel. So it goes beyond Gaza, it's just a full-blown,
Yeah, so for the Islamic resistance movement, so-called, like Hamas, obviously there can never be a peace agreement, because their whole raison d'etre, their whole reason of existing is to destroy Israel. And by the way, kill as many Jews as possible while they're at it. It's in their charter, that's what they believe. So you can't make peace with people like that. So therefore, if there's going to be a peaceful movement, then the Palestinians need to get rid of Hamas themselves. Israel's not going to do it to destroy the idea militarily. But, the rest of the Arab world, Israel, look, Abraham Accords, Israel's now made peace with Egypt and Jordan. They've got the agreements towards peace with 4 more Arab countries now, with Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, and the UAE. And so there's 6 countries right there. Tunisia, Algeria, there is a move towards peace between Israel and the Arab countries. And although now it seems impossible to imagine that there can be full-blown peace between Israel and all the Arab world, imagine what it looked like in 1948, say, 1950. Germany had just killed 6 million Jews. And today, 80 years later, or whatever it is, they're the best of friends. Germany is one of the strongest supporters of Israel. There's about 35,000 Israelis living in Berlin very happily. So they made peace. They killed 6 million Jews, and now Israel made peace with Germany. Why shouldn't they make peace with the Palestinians on their doorstep? So it's not going to be easy. But yeah, there is a path forward. And it just, and the leadership has to change on both sides, and they need to grasp an opportunity that will be presented in 2, 3, 4 years when this all dies down. And one thing that I've always said is that I know exactly when there will be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, when 2 conditions are met. Israel has to understand that might, that force is not the answer to everything. And the Palestinians have to understand that time is not on their side. When both sides reach those 2 conclusions, at that point, they can look to each other, and this becomes that, through discussion. So I'm always an optimist, no war goes on forever, even though some people would say, well, the Arabs have been fighting each other for 1,400 years, since 632 AD when Muhammad died. Sunnis and Shiites have been fighting each other for 1,400 years. That's not very encouraging. In Afghanistan, they have a proverb saying, revenge took 100 years, revenge was swift. So this can go on for a long time, but I don't believe that the Israelis and the Palestinians will do that. I think presented with the right timing and pressure from America, I keep stressing that, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen naturally from within. It needs to be imposed from without. And Israel hates to hear that, but it's ain't going to happen otherwise. Next.
This might be a naive question, but what's the difference between Hamas and Fatah? What are the differences between the 2 groups?
Fatah is the former PLO, which was led by Yasser Arafat, which was founded as an organization to destroy Israel. They then turned into more of a political organization, Fatah, and they are now the government in the West Bank. Hamas means Islamic Resistance Organization. It's an acronym. It's an Islamic resistance organization. And what they want is Sharia law in Israel, in Palestine. They're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is one reason why Egypt won't allow Palestinians today to go from Gaza into Egypt. They're the enemy, as far as Egypt is concerned. Hamas is the enemy. So that's it. One is an Islamic resistance organization. One is a secular political movement. What Israelis will say the difference is, if you ask many Israelis, especially right-wing, they'll say the difference is that Fatah wants to destroy Israel slowly, and Hamas wants to destroy Israel quickly.
How do you rationalize the claim? Is this better? How do you rationalize the claim that the occupied Palestinian territories must be held and controlled by the military of a militarized buffer zone to protect Israeli Jews from a wave of murderous anti-Semitism washing over from the West Bank to Israel proper? Meanwhile...
You can see where this question comes from.
Yeah, we all can. We all can. Meanwhile, so you wanted controversy, right? Successive Israeli government allow, encourage, and financially subsidize these same Jewish Israelis to go and live there, inside what is called to be a militarized buffer zone. Isn't the only possible rationalization that of the Israelis being thieving colonialists? There you go.
For this, I need the mic. I think I've got
No, we don't need the mic.
It's okay. Thieving colonialists. Look, there's a big difference, but I think, this is my personal opinion only, of course, there's a big difference between Gaza, Israel, the West Bank. There are various trigger words that people throw out. Apartheid, colonialists, ethnic cleansing. These are all trigger words. Thieving colonialists is a good one. In the West Bank, I would say, you know what, it's a pretty good description. If you accept that that land is there to be part of a future Palestinian state. The Israeli government policy is very clear, especially today with this particular government. Take as much of it as we can. It's pretty much always been the Israeli government policy since 1967. Some shout it out like the right-wingers, some whisper it like the left-wingers. It's sometimes forgotten that the great supporters of the Israeli settler movement in 1967, in the very beginning, were Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin, who became the, I'm not saying left-wing, but the center-left leaders of Israel. They were the people who supported Rabbi Moshe Levinger when he entered the Park Hotel in Hebron, which was the first settler act after 1967. They were supported by Peres and Rabin. Peres and Rabin suddenly saw the light at a certain point and changed. But the bottom line is that what the same guy I mentioned earlier, Yaakov Neyman, he said to me when he was finance minister, he was a wonderful guy, smart guy. And what he said, the role of every Israeli generation is to move the border a little bit further east. That's what they do. So it's a very clear policy to take that land. But it's not agreed upon by by all of Israel. In fact, there's probably most of Israel doesn't want anything to do with the West Bank. What they want is peace. And any deal they can come to with the Palestinians living on the West Bank would be welcome to most Israelis. I mean, why is there a wall? Why did Israel build a wall along the whole West Bank? By the way, we say the wall along the West Bank. There's only about 27 miles of wall. The rest is just a fence. To stop terrorists coming to Israel and killing Israelis. I was there when they built the wall, that whole period. Before that, a terrorist living in Qalqilia or Nablus or in the bit further north, Jenin, he just got in his car with his bomb and he got on the highway and he drove to Israel and blew himself up in Netanya. Nothing to stop him. Literally, get in the car and drive and blow yourself up or leave a bomb. So they built the wall. That's why they built the wall. That's why they built the fence around Gaza, to stop people doing that. However, that kind of set a de facto border between Israel and the West Bank, and the settlers then expanded inside inside the West Bank. And now with this particular government, you have this right-wing radical members of the government who are encouraging these young Jewish settlers to take more land, and we're seeing this all the time now. A lot of the problem today in the West Bank is because of the young settlers becoming more aggressive with the okay of the government, or parts of the government, against the Palestinians. So this is a we sometimes lose faith, given what's going on in Gaza. We're not paying much attention to the West Bank, but 240 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7. Many of them were terrorists attacking Israelis, but many of them were also killed by Israelis, and some of them by these Jewish settlers. So, is it a colonialist? Is Israel a thieving colonialist government? Partly, I would say, yeah. And so that needs to be stopped. I mean, there needs to be elections in Israel, and the question has to be addressed: if there's peace with the Palestinians, what constitutes the land of the Palestinians? That's got to be discussed. Originally, General Sharon's idea, was a great supporter of the settlement movement in the West Bank, was that creating facts on the ground. We'll settle here, we'll settle there, and in the end it'll be impossible to have a Palestinian state. Mission accomplished. Doesn't help the peace movement much. So Israelis and Palestinians have to come together, but before they can do that, they've got to change the government, and they've got to change the government priorities. And the one Israeli government priority set in the West Bank needs to change. Otherwise, there won't be Palestinian state and there won't be peace. However, thieving colonialists is a bit rough, I think. I'm fine, I think
Okay. All right. Hi. Thank you for coming today. You had talked about this rampant spreading of anti-Semitism in the United States, and I'm very focused on college campuses right now. I have 3 kids, one in San Francisco, one in La Jolla, and one in the UK. And I'm on these WhatsApp texts, and we're all parents and things like that. It's like, what can we do? And I look at my son, he's not stressed, but he's stressed. It's in his psyche, but then it is affecting his schoolwork. And what do we as parents do? I do feel really, really helpless. And it's something I think about all the time.
As a parent of students in campuses, in university, they're upset, they're nervous, they're feeling intimidated. What can you do?
Yeah, and a couple of the people that are on WhatsApp said that their daughter was a victim of XYZ and things that happened. We just feel very helpless, and here we are sending our kids off to get an education, and finals are coming around, and it's really hard to focus when your son's walking to school and there's flags everywhere and protesters and things like that. So it's scary. It is very, very scary to be Jewish on American campuses, and it's also very, very scary to be a Palestinian on American campuses. It's very scary for everybody. And one of the reasons it's so scary is that I think among students in America and in England too, where I come from, there's a limited amount of knowledge, and they're young people, and it's their job to stand up and to demonstrate and to be angry about something. We all did that, and this is the subject of the moment. I think the difference is that when I was a student in England and banned the bomb, we weren't attacking people and fighting. Today they are. Today it's a violent situation on campuses. I've actually, in some campuses, and actually in many campuses. In fact, the more elite the college, the more violent it is, funnily enough, in the States. So I've just finished a book tour, actually, in America. I went around 12 towns in the States, big towns. And the campus situation came up in every conversation I had, because I was giving book tours. And it always came up. So, what can you do about it, to be specific, rather than going into the whole subject? First of all, I would say, as a Jew and as a Palestinian, it's important not to stop wearing your keffiyeh, to stop wearing your Star of David. Wear it, be proud,
demand from the organization, the institutions where they are, that they pay attention and that they're proactive and they stop violence and that they increase security. And so that is happening to some extent, and to some extent it's not happening. A lot of campuses are not paying enough attention by a long way. They're simply not listening to the needs of the students because it's easier for various reasons. No one has asked yet about this question of rape. Israeli women being raped. It's kind of the same.
Men.
And men too. It's kind of the same. It's partly the same issue, in that people aren't speaking up. You need to speak up, and you need to be heard, and you need to demand to be heard. And that would be my advice to students who are feeling threatened. It doesn't help the parents much because our job is to worry about our kids. But their job is to be active students on the campuses and to continue with their studies. And I know it sounds, it's easy for me to say that here. I stopped studying 65 years ago. Mind you, that was second grade. I dropped out of school. But no, I think this is a time to stand up. I know, and it's difficult. It's hard. It's scary. But this is the time to stand up and be heard, as a Jew and as a Palestinian. And what we should really be doing is what I want to do today, is to encourage people to get together and talk about it. And that's what they need to do on campuses. Instead of having these violent demonstrations like from the river to the sea on the one side and the other ones, bring the hostages home, get together. I know it's kind of easy to say, but that's the way forward. This gentleman in the striped suit shirt has been trying to take... The gentleman in the striped shirt keeps... You've got such a nice smile.
Thank you. I don't need a microphone. Quick question. I'm just curious, what's the difference that you see in media coverage today versus back in the day when you were covering the conference?
I hate that, back in the day. A few weeks ago, a rabbi came up to me in one of the places I was at, and he was a bald-headed guy with a long beard, and he said to me, "Oh, I grew up to your reporting." However, I take the point. It's very different. It's totally different. I mean, it's much more dangerous today, even though I did all those things that we talked about earlier. Weaponry has become so much more lethal that when I used to, like in Cyprus, hide behind a tree or a wall, today the bullet goes straight through both of them. So it's much more dangerous today. On the other hand, today journalists have bodyguards, which I never did. So there's that. But the real difference, of course, is social media. That's completely changed the delivery of information. So whereas I used to work for, and still do to an extent, NBC, mainstream media, it was all about you either trusted the organization or you didn't trust the organization. The New York Times is biased or it's not biased. Fox News is biased or it's not biased. But you knew pretty much what you were going to get from each organization, and at least you knew, for the most part, that they were professional gatekeepers of information. Information was channeled through from the ground up, if you like, from reporters to the editors, to the senior editors, to the people who put the paper together or the TV program. And there's a lot of people involved who are very professional, and their overriding goal is to get it right, basically. Their version of right is another question. But today, most information about major events comes like that, within literally seconds. From somebody's phone who happens to be on the scene, it's then flashed around the world in seconds, while people like me are still trying to check, have you got a second source? Who said that? Where did we get that from? It's gone, it's out there already. And the whole in this rush to get eyeballs, because that's what gets the advertisers, that's how you make money, by having more people look at your media site. Get it out there. When something happens, what do you do? What does anyone these days do when they hear of something? They go to their phone, and they see a news flash, and they read it. And that news flash could be from the New York Times, in which case you pretty much know some professional people have been at it. But most likely it's on TikTok or Instagram or whatever social media platform young people are looking at. And it could be anything. And that's exactly what happened, of course, with the hospital, whose name I can never remember, in Gaza, where Hamas said within minutes, And Israel bombed the hospital, killing 500 people. That was all around the world in a flash. And it has real-world consequences. The Arab leaders believed it. They cancelled the summit in Jordan with President Biden. And in fact, it wasn't that an Israeli plane bombed the hospital, killing 500. It was an Islamic Jihad rocket that hit the car park that killed, we don't really know how many, a few dozen or maybe a couple of hundred, whatever it was, terrible. But it wasn't Israel, and it wasn't, none of it was true. But it had real-world consequences. And so that's the problem with the media today, that you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know how true it is. Every time somebody says something to me about, this is terrible, look at this, oh my God, I always say, wait, who said that? Where do you get it from? Most people don't do that. If I could just give that example of Rumble, my wife, Hagar, who's Israeli, and follows Israeli media, at one point said to me, look at this, there's this photograph of all these Palestinians against the war with Israeli soldiers, this was a couple of days ago, with all these Israeli soldiers pointing their rifles at their backs. We still is. So, and the news was they've confiscated from these Arabs in the Jewish Arab town of Ramla in central Israel 1,000 M16 rifles, dozens or hundreds of hand grenades. And oh my God, the first response to that is, this is what we're all afraid of. Israeli Arabs standing up and fighting the Jews inside Israel, not West Bank, not Gaza, the Israeli Arabs inside Israel. They can start a civil war. They've got 1,000 M16s. And Hagar was, this was all over the Israeli social media. And Hagar was saying, oh my God. And I said, who said that? Where did it come from? Turned out to be completely untrue. It was an old picture from years ago. There was nothing about 1,000 guns. But it was designed by somebody, Iran, Russia, Hamas, who knows who does these things, to instill fear, hatred, and apprehension among Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. Because that is, excuse my language, that is the wet dream of Hamas, to have the Israeli Arabs inside Israel rise up against the Jews. That's what they want. So this is social media, it was all over the place. So it's a kind of a long answer, excuse me, but it's really important that the way we get information. Always ask yourself 2 or 3 times, the more dramatic the information, the more you need to check it.
This might sound really unpopular in this crowd, but you don't think Israel's gone a wee bit too far?
Has Israel gone too far?
I think, from my point of view, I thought the ceasefire, maybe that will lead to more of a ceasefire. Now I'm hearing people are protesting outside the Museum of Natural History in New York. The spillover is like crazy.
Has Israel gone too far? It's basically an impossible question for me to answer, because I come down firmly on the side of this. No, I'm about to say what I'm... Hey, give me a break. I come down firmly on the side of this. If you don't deal with the question now, you've got the same question in a few... Let me say, then you're going to be... This is good, it's okay. Then you've got the same question in a few years. Now, when you look at the images coming out of Gaza, you cannot help but be overwhelmed by the pain and the disaster that has been visited upon the Palestinian people. You've got something like the most recent number is something like 15,500 people, I think, dead Palestinians. So has Israel gone too far? Anybody who kills 15,000 people has gone too far. Yeah, but have you achieved your goal? What's the next step? Hang on, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. Have you achieved your goal? And the answer is no, there's still 150 hostages being held by Hamas. Hamas is still saying they're going to do this again. So yes, it should stop. Of course it should stop. But there's also the question of responsibility. Whose responsibility is it that Israel is attacking in this way? If Hamas simply said, for instance, and this is the last thing I'll say, then back to you. If Hamas simply, or anybody else, if Hamas simply said, you know what, this has gone too far. Everyone's saying it's gone too far, Israel should stop. But guess who's not saying that? Hamas. Hamas is not saying that. If Hamas simply said, okay, it's gone too far, we're going to release the 150 hostages, we're going to stop firing rockets at Israel, Israel's going to stop bombing us, and we're going to get back to our homes, we can start rebuilding. If Hamas said that, I'm not saying Israel would agree, I have no idea. That would be a way forward, but they're not saying that. So, yeah. Or anybody else.
No, it just concerns me the spillover. That's
First, thank you very much for your comment.
Hang on, sorry, let's lady to speak. I'm sorry, one second.
the spillover effect and the anti-Semitism and pro-Palestine.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But there's always been a war. I mean, I was there in '82 during the war. And, I mean, there's been wars, but this time it's so different.
It is different, and I think what made it different was the horrific Hamas attack on Israel. The fact that it was so atrocious what they did. I'm not going to go into all the details because you all know that by now. But it was so atrocious what they did that the government of Israel, supported entirely by the people, the unanimous, pretty much unanimous, is that it mustn't happen again. Now, how do you stop it happening again? Okay, this is a problem. You know, by killing 15,000 Arabs in Gaza, will that stop it happening again? No, of course it won't. What will stop it happening again is destroying Hamas and then having the Palestinian people, hopefully, electing a different group to lead them who are more amenable to peace with Israel. Now, as I go back to Moshe, does that mean they have to accept that Israel occupies their land? This is a very complex world we're in, but it actually has a simple answer, which is that get rid of the radical leaders who've always led the two-state, and then have different leaders who actually want to make peace, actually want peace, because Bibi Netanyahu's whole policy in the last 15 years has been to avoid any real peace negotiations, in the same way as Hamas, which has been leading Gaza for the same amount of time that Bibi has been leading Israel. They also don't want peace. You've got two leaderships that don't want peace. That's what's led to this.
What about Iran, though? They're pulling the strings, so how do you stop Iran? What do you do about Iran?
There's a couple of next step military scenarios, which is that everybody knows this is a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Sunni Shiites. So how do you stop it? Do you stop it by somehow eliminating Iran? That would end this whole situation, probably. They're not supporting Hezbollah, they're not supporting Hamas, they're not supporting the Houthis in Yemen, they're not supporting the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. The whole equation changes. So who's going to get rid of Iran? Go do it. Until then,
Excuse me, so this was my question. What strategic consideration should the Israeli leadership take in the role of Iran? It's clear to me, I know people have looked at it, that Iran is a fomenter here, and they've got 2 or 3 proxies. How should the Israelis put that into the equation to come to a solution?
Israel can do nothing against Iran apart from occasional pinpoint raids, which they've done in the past. They can do nothing that would stop Iran by itself. Iran is 1,000 miles away from Israel. Iran has a population of 79 million people. Israel's got 9 million people. So by itself, Israel can't really do anything. It's a matter of either the Arab world standing up against Iran, and that becomes a Sunni Shiite struggle. That's not going to happen. Although Saudi Arabia, who would you rather have on your side fighting, Iran or the princes of Saudi Arabia? So it's really only America, unfortunately. America is the only military force that could possibly change things in Iran. And if you remember a few years ago, there was a genuine Iranian civil movement against the government. There were demonstrations all over Iran, and they had been encouraged by the American government. But when push came to shove, the Americans backed down. And those leaders were arrested, and many were executed, and people were intimidated. So the one chance that America had to change things in Iran, what was it, 8 or 9 years ago now, they backed down. So as long as the leadership in Iran remains the same, they will continue supporting these Shiite militias, and Israel's paying the price. And ultimately, it's not only Israel paying the price, it's the Palestinians, because they've been put against each other.
Hello. I'm from Israel. I have about 2.5 after October 11th, and it was 7, sorry. And I want to consider myself a humanitarian. But I have to say that it's been very difficult after having to watch the Palestinians and feel bad for them because I know some things that other people in the world don't know. I know that not all of them, but some of them do educate their children to actually hate the Israelis, actually want to kill them. So, going back to the other lady, has it gone down too far? I don't know. But I have to go stereotypes.
So what was the last thing you said? You don't know about?
I asked because I was terrified that it would happen again. Now, would it happen again? I don't know. They're trying to. They'll try again, I'm sure.
When did you leave?
On the 15th.
Of October.
October.
So right away you understood what was going
Pretty
on.
much right away I got.
Will you go back?
I don't know. Doesn't look like it's getting any better.
Which part of Israel are you from?
Tel Aviv. Not so far. I think it's about an hour and a half. But half an hour and a half.
And do you know many other people who did the same as you, who left for the same reason?
Many.
And so that is the success of Hamas, that they've instilling fear into Israelis, and many left, and yet 200,000 Israelis went back to Israel after October 7th, right? To join the fight. They were reserves called up, but 200,000 people went back to Israel. Now, there's nothing more natural, I think, than being afraid and leaving. That's terrific. You know, you did it, good. And so you should always do what's right for you.
I also want to feel bad for these babies in the incubators. You know, I think there were 50 babies. Nobody wants them to die because they don't have oxygen. But I know that some of these mothers will probably educate their babies to hate Israelis. So I feel very torn.
Well, yeah, I have no answer to that. I mean, we're all torn. It's a horrific situation going. There's no right or wrong. I mean, when you see those pictures of the 50 that you're mentioning, you know, actually I think it was 31 infants, outside the incubators because there was no electricity. You think that's horrific. I mean, you cannot do anything but sympathize. But you can ask the question, how come there's electricity underneath Shifa Hospital with Hamas and not in the hospital for the babies? So that, we know that's true. So, latest and then you. Sorry.
I have the microphone. Is it okay? Yes, I'm curious to know, since you are a seasoned journalist with many years of boots on the ground in the Middle East, what attention has been given to the reports coming out from the media that Israel did have advance notice of the possible attack?
Well, I think everybody's picking up on that story now.
Yes, but the story is not new.
I'm sorry?
The story goes back to October 7th, when the initial attack occurred. So now we are going into 8 weeks, and there really has not been any notice by the Israeli government to take mention of this. It's been quieted, it's been stuffed under the couch, and we are all sitting here wondering what could have been done to prevent this.
Well, first of all, it's not true that the media didn't report on it. It was a major story immediately. The first, I remember reporting myself, and I wasn't even in the country, that the first stories coming out was how come Israel was taken by surprise. It was a military and intelligence complete spectacular failure on all levels. So everybody was reporting on that, so from the beginning. What's happening is that more and more information is coming out about what was known and who knew it and who should have acted on it and who didn't act on it. So it's a scandal. It's like the worst event, the worst day in Israel's history was caused by the arrogance of everybody in power who didn't believe that the Arabs were actually capable of such a thing. So, but it's not true that no one has been reporting on it. It's been a major element of reporting all the time.
I've been signaled that it's time probably to put a wrap on this. We are so honored. I think Martin's wife gets priority at this juncture.
Thank you. I'll put my mask off. This is
I'm in trouble now.
coming from the heart. I didn't plan that. But because there's such a big group of people, I believe that energy transfers something. So if each and every one of us can take a second, there are many, well, maybe 3 religions, different people, different ages, baby, etc. Maybe we can just, I have a cousin still in Gaza. I had 7 people of my family, and in the last 2 months I did a lot of energy work because I didn't have any other tools. So whether you believe in energy or not, let's try something. So just for 1 minute, we close our eyes. Because each one of us is a mother, is a sister, grandmother, father, brothers. Each one of you have somebody in the family that could have been in Gaza. So if we just collect that energy of understanding that family is very important and direct a ray of light from your heart towards Gaza, to the Palestinians, to the Hamas, to the Israelis, to anyone who is there in this difficult moment. And I shut my mouth now and take a moment. Just send a ray of light from your heart to this painful, bleeding place. Thank you. When Martin talks about might comes from the heart, not only from arms. Thank you so much.
And thank you to Chesna, to JC3, who are the sponsors of this event, and have sponsored some wine and other beverages in the parish hall. So thank you for coming. Shalom.